Good morning, everybody. Today is Monday, August 28th. I'm Hurricane Hal with your tropical weather update. A lot going on in the tropics today. The main focus, obviously, is Tropical Storm Idalia, forecast to become Hurricane Idalia in the near future. Let's check out this map here. So Idalia centered there over the northwestern Caribbean. You can see the white dot at the center of circulation. The orange area shows tropical storm force winds. Maximum sustained winds now 65 miles an hour. It's on the move to the north at about 6 knots, and it's forecast to track up here into the northeastern Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane warnings for western Cuba. And check this out. Now we have hurricane watches where hurricane conditions are possible from up here by Indian Pass all the way down to Inglewood. That includes all of Metro Tampa and a lot of populated areas there along the western coast of Florida. This is a map of the probability of 50-knot winds. Those are 58-mile-an-hour winds. I choose that to show because, in my opinion, that's really where we start to see a lot of damage. That's where we start to see a lot of tree falls. We start to see minor damage to buildings as well. And check this out. This is probability of 58-mile-an-hour winds. You can look in here by some of these really populated areas like the western part of Metro Tampa. Some of these areas now, like the western part of Pinellas County, parts of St. Petersburg, over to Clearwater, now 58-mile-an-hour winds sustained are probable in those areas. That's, again, the western part of Metro Tampa, all the way up through certainly Clearwater and other areas there to the north. 58-mile-an-hour sustained winds are now probable. And check this out when we go to hurricane force winds. These are the probabilities of hurricane force winds, sustained winds exceeding 74 miles an hour. It's not chosen arbitrarily. That's what becomes a Cat 1 hurricane, and that's where you start seeing substantial damage to homes, to roofs, to siding, to things like that. Now we're looking at hurricane force winds. The chance of that is getting up to at least 30% in the western edge of Pinellas County, over through certainly Clearwater, areas like that, all the way up to this area. Probably the bullseye there for the most likely hurricane force winds is getting up by Cedar Key. But again, this is a big deal. And y'all, reading the latest National Hurricane Center advisory, rapid intensification is becoming more likely. Right now, the maximum sustained winds are forecast to get up to around a Category 3 hurricane. That's what we call a major hurricane, where we start seeing substantial building damage to well-built buildings. The maximum intensity guidance now from the official forecast from the Hurricane Center is 115-mile-an-hour winds, but it may go beyond that. Rapid intensification is becoming more likely. The water temps out there, y'all, are crazy warm, in the upper 80s. There's a lot of warm water, not only at the surface, but down deep. Near record water temperatures there in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Idalia is going to have a moist environment. Things may be set up very well for rapid intensification. Right now, we're expecting definitely intensification there in the northwestern Caribbean and southeastern Gulf of Mexico. There's some wind shear right now, which is moderating the amount of intensity, but that may drop off. It may really get explosive there in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. So again, we're looking here at likeliness of hurricane force winds. I'm talking to you about potentially the highest sustained winds. Right now, forecast to be a Cat 3. But if you're in here anywhere in Metro Tampa, all the way up through Clearwater and points north, you need to be prepared for a Cat 4 hurricane. They always say prepare for one category above the official forecast. There's some uncertainty in the intensity guidance, but it's becoming more likely that rapid intensification will happen. Well, y'all, let's talk about when are these big winds going to arrive. This is a map from the National Hurricane Center showing the most likely arrival time of tropical storm force winds. Those are winds exceeding 39 miles an hour. That's when you start seeing some tree branches come down and things really start moving around. You want to have everything secured and prepped before tropical storm force winds arrive. The most likely time in the arrival of tropical storm force winds would be around 8 p.m. There in Metro Tampa, St. Pete, and a little bit later if you move farther north. But look at this. We also have the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds. So again, what if this storm moves in a little bit quicker than anticipated? Well, in that case, really we may see tropical storm force winds there along Tampa metro area around maybe 4 p.m., getting up by Cedar Key and some of these other areas, maybe closer to 8 p.m. Again, we could still even see wind impacts, Tallahassee, points inland, Ocala, Gainesville, these other areas. This is really the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds. You want to have everything prepped And if you're going to evac, you want to do that. You want to get all that done before tropical storm force winds arrive. Landfall time right now looking most likely after midnight on Wednesday. That depends on the track. These tracks that come in at a high angle or a sharp angle to the coast, if you change the track a little bit, you can really change your landfall point and you can really change your timing as well. So it's really hard to pinpoint this stuff right now. It's good to look at these maps to get a general idea of when conditions are going to get bad. Let's talk about storm surge, y'all. So storm surge is this big saltwater push. It's the deadliest, most destructive hazard on the planet. And again, closer to where we're thinking landfall, possibly a 7 to 11 foot storm surge. But look at this really to the right of the track, or even, again, the track may come near or over even Metro Tampa St. Pete. But in general right now, National Hurricane Center forecasting 4 to 7 feet of storm surge in there by Metro Tampa St. Pete, 7 to 11 farther to the north in places like Cedar Key. This is a big deal. The west coast of Florida is very efficient at generating storm surge, in part because it's so shallow, in part because imagine a storm center out here, the counterclockwise circulation, you're going to get a strong south wind setting up before the storm. Did you know that water deflects to the right of the wind direction? So if we have strong winds coming in here from the south, the water deflects to the right. It's something called Ekman transport. It makes it very efficient for water to pile up here along the coast of West Florida. The other thing is the storm is pushing in winds from the south, pushing all this water up, and then the storm itself kind of traps it here. Imagine all this water pushing up from the south, but the storm itself kind of traps it there with the eye wall and can actually push a lot of that storm on shore. So there's very efficient a dome of water that'll form here in the west central coast of Florida. This is a big deal, y'all. 4 to 7 feet of storm surge is not anything to take lightly, for sure. Keep in mind as well, maybe you live in Metro Tampa and you say, well, thank God I have an elevation certificate and I'm at 8 feet. I'm going to be fine. Not necessarily. When we see these numbers here, 4 to 7 feet of storm surge or 6 to 9 feet of storm surge, let's say 7 feet is the highest you're going to see in your area. And again, these numbers could change based on the track of the storm and the intensity of the storm. But if you did get a 7-foot storm surge near Tampa, that is not the height of the water above mean sea level. That's the height of the water above high tide. Your high tide is not at 0. So I pulled this tide gauge here for the St. Pete tide gauge. High tide on Wednesday is over 1.5 feet. So when you look back at this graphic, 4 to 7 feet of storm surge in Metro Tampa, even if that verified, if that peak water came in around the time of high tide, you're looking at 7 feet above 1.5 feet. So now all of a sudden your salt water's at 8.5 feet. Fortunately, it doesn't look like the peak storm surge would be at the time of high tide in Tampa. But again, this can change based on the track. And the timing of high tide can really vary depending if you're in a bay, if you're in the open coast. It's hard to pinpoint that stuff. The big picture here is when you see numbers here on this map, the saltwater level may get about 1.5 feet higher than that. And then on top of that, if you get 8 or 10 inches of rain, it's something called compound flooding, where that rain isn't going to drain because you have many feet of salt water that have piled up along the coast. This is a really cool map from the National Hurricane Center. It shows the potential storm surge flooding map. There's a 10% chance that this will be equaled or exceeded. So this is kind of the worst case scenario, but this is showing potential inundation above ground level. And where you see the yellows here, you're looking at least 3 feet of water above ground level. I'm zooming in here to Tampa St. Pete, to that metro area. You can see some of these developed areas out by Treasure Island, some of these areas in the western part of Pinellas County. Again, the worst case scenario here is at least 3 feet of water above ground. Some of these low-lying areas like Bayshore Boulevard and these other areas of Tampa, we could certainly expect some saltwater inundation. You can find this on the National Hurricane Center advisory for what will become Hurricane Idalia. This is looking at the area farther north than Metro Tampa, less populated area. You have Cedar Key out here. You have Yankeetown over here. Again, this is getting a little bit to the eastern side of almost Appalachia Bay. Not a lot of population up there. But the point here is we're seeing some reds on the map. That's more than 9 feet of salt water piling up above ground level. Y'all, for the people that live out there that have that live in a remote area like that, maybe have a fish camp or a vacation home or just live out there, there could be a lot of storm surge pushing in whenever you have a storm that's heading up there north of Tampa, over by Appalachia Bay or farther east. Yeah, let's talk about rainfall finally. Rainfall, a big deal with these storms. We're seeing a lot of orange on the map. Orange is 6 to 10 inches of rainfall, but you know that there's training, there's banding. It's really hard to predict exactly what the rainfall is going to be. When we see areas with orange here, looking at 6 to 10 inches of rainfall, you're going to have local areas above that. You're going to get some areas where there's training where you shouldn't be surprised to see 12, 13 inches of rain. But keep in mind, we're adding this on top of the storm surge on the coast. So if you live near a canal and you're getting 2 inches of rain an hour and that's draining into the canal's already elevated with maybe 6, 7, 8 feet of storm surge. So really in these areas, I'd say from Cedar Key down to Metro Tampa, I'd be really concerned with not only the rainfall that's falling on your property, but how it's draining. And it's not going to drain very well, something called compound flooding, where we have rainfall drainage on top of all the storm surge. Y'all, this is a big deal. This is a big storm. I know a lot of my friends in Metro Tampa say we never get hit. There are all kinds of folklore with Indian burial grounds and all these things that protect them. I'd say that's folklore, that's not science, and this could be a big deal. Again, it's possible that we could see not only hurricane force winds, but maybe even major hurricane force winds, category 3 or above, are a potential for even Metro Tampa, St. Pete, definitely Clearwater and points north. We should be prepared for a Cat 4 hurricane moving in Tuesday night. Again, right now, the official guidance is for a Cat 3. And again, we don't just, when we talk about the peak winds, that's just really in a small part of the storm right there in the eye wall. It's really more important to look at these large wind fields. That's why I show these probabilistic maps. And this one, again, maybe I think one of the more important maps, probability of 58 mile an hour winds. This is where you really start seeing extensive power outages, a lot of tree falls and damage starting to buildings. Again, that's becoming really probable in those areas near and north of Tampa. Y'all, I'm going to be going into the storm, of course. I'm heading over east today. I'll be providing coverage multiple times a day. Shoot any questions you have. I focus a lot, not only on the forecast, but on the impacts. What's happening on the ground? What are we expecting? And what are we seeing? I'll be there on the ground. If you're concerned about specific areas, let me know. I'll try to give pinpoint forecast as much as I can. Y'all, big storm. Right now it's Tropical Storm Idalia, maximum sustained wind 65. Forecast to become a hurricane. And again, a big time storm. Do not take this lightly. This could have some huge impacts over the next several days. This is Hurricane Hal signing off for now. I'll be back with you as I head east towards Tropical Storm and what will become Hurricane Idalia.